That's a brilliant idea, Greg. This could easily bring in $12 million this year alone, said the CEO, as the room erupted in applause. I stayed silent. That idea was mine. Greg had stolen it weeks ago. My name is Jamal Williams. I'm 41, a product manager at Technova for the past 7 years. I've always kept a low profile. While others talked, I built. I know every detail of our products because I was there from the start, listening to customers, fixing bugs, delivering solutions without needing the spotlight. Greg Larson is the opposite. 3 years younger, Stanford MBA, smooth talker, sharp dresser. He was promoted to Director of Innovation because he knew how to sell ideas even if they weren't his. The kind of guy who shines in meetings but crashes when it's time to code. The board loved him. He looked like everything a modern executive should be. He just wasn't. But that morning, I wasn't just quiet. I was watching. Greg had overplayed his hand and missed one detail that would change everything. The idea came to me on a Saturday night. I was in the kitchen doing the dishes when a product usage notification popped up on my phone, an automated report from a feature we'd been testing with a small group of users. I stopped. The graph showed something no one had noticed before, a recurring drop-off pattern right after the first week of use. That was it. If we could predict that moment, we could intervene before the customer gave up. We could turn churn into revenue. I sat down at my computer, hands still wet. I spent the night modeling the concept, a predictive customer behavior tool. It wasn't just a feature, it was a business within the business. By Sunday, I had cleaned it all up. Monday morning, I brought the concept to our first product meeting of the week. Greg sat at the head of the table as usual, eyes on his phone, that practiced half smile on his face. I asked for 10 minutes to present. He looked up, waved me on. I started. I showed the data. I explained how we could use lightweight machine learning, based on usage patterns and engagement triggers. I gave them the impact forecast, $12 million in added revenue in the first year alone. A few colleagues seemed genuinely excited. Greg just said, "Interesting, but maybe a bit too ambitious for now." But I noticed he was writing a lot of notes. Then he moved us to the next item on the agenda. I thought that was it. Another idea shoved into the invisible drawer of the office. 2 weeks later, I was invited to a strategy alignment meeting with the executive board. Greg was scheduled to present a new strategic monetization initiative. I was listed as a technical observer. I sat in the back of the room. Dim lights, projector on. And there he was, using the exact same slides, the same logic structure, the same churn triggers I had presented. The only thing he changed was the name. Now it was called Project Orion. With every chart, my stomach twisted. I couldn't tell if I was more angry or ashamed. The entire company would see that project as his, and in a way, it was. He presented it, he sold it, he earned the applause. And me? I had built it with everything I had, honestly, quietly. It was my invisible work, treated like a rough draft by someone who hadn't written a single word of it. After the meeting, he walked by my desk. "Nice work today, Brian. Great energy in the room," he said without even looking me in the eye. Then he just kept walking like nothing had happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the couch, going through the files. I found the emails, the dates, the original models, the time-stamped notes. Everything was saved, digitally signed. But more importantly, I remembered something he didn't know. One critical technical detail that hadn't been implemented yet. And without it, the whole plan would fail. I had never shared that part. It was still in testing. And Greg had no idea he was pitching an incomplete project to the board. I wasn't going to run to HR, or write a letter, or blow up. That's not who I am. Instead, I decided to watch, wait, and move when the time was right. What Greg didn't know was that I had built an invisible trap right into the heart of the project, and it was about to spring. The days that followed were a blur. I went to the office on autopilot. Arrived early, like always. Drank my black coffee. Sat at the same desk in the corner of the 6th floor, but something had shifted. The way people looked at me. Some with pity, others with a kind of caution. Like I was someone who had seen too much and said too little. What hurt wasn't just watching Greg being treated like some visionary. It was knowing that no one seemed to remember the original meeting. No one seemed to notice that it all started with me. Or worse, they noticed and pretended not to. The silence hurt more than indifference. I kept delivering my work with precision. But inside, I was falling apart. I had too much pride to make a scene. Too much pride to play the victim. But not enough pride to stop feeling it. I worked with my head down but my eyes open. I started noticing patterns, whispers in meetings, projects that used to come to me now going straight to Greg's team. Project Orion had become the company's new toy. Everyone wanted a piece of it, so I started archiving everything. Emails, meeting notes, earlier document versions, even screenshots of my digital whiteboard from 3 weeks before Greg's idea made its debut on PowerPoint. What no one knew was that I had automatic backups synced to my personal cloud. Every draft time-stamped, every thought process preserved. But this wasn't legal proof. It was emotional weight. I didn't want to take it to the board. Not yet. I wanted him to know, to realize it wasn't just a well-packaged plan he had stolen. He had taken a part of my identity at this company. On Friday, a junior analyst from his team came over to my desk. "Hey Brian, quick question. Do you remember that thing about usage correlation and drop-off? Greg asked us to build the technical part for the new slide, but no one really understands how it worked in the demo." I closed my laptop slowly and looked at her. She seemed genuinely confused. And young. Way too young. "You guys are trying to build the predictive model without the time-based segmentation?" Her eyes widened. "There's time segmentation? Yeah, that's what makes the whole thing work." She scribbled it down, thanked me, and rushed off. In that moment, I knew for sure. He had no idea how the core of the project actually worked. It wasn't just vanity or ambition. It was strategic ignorance. He had stolen the wrapping but didn't understand what was inside. The following week, Greg started avoiding me. I was only invited to side meetings. No more executive sessions. Project Orion had become a satellite drifting further and further from me. But the pressure was starting to build at the edges. A customer success manager pulled me aside in the break room. He said some of the Orion test runs were inconsistent. The data wasn't matching up. The predictions were way off. He asked for my opinion. I didn't say much. I just asked if anyone was using the time-based segmentation I had recommended at the beginning. He said he'd never even heard of it. That night, as I was leaving the office, I saw Greg alone in the conference room. Dim light, laptop open, his brow furrowed, and for the first time, he looked unsure of himself. Maybe he knew, or maybe he was starting to suspect, but it still wasn't the right moment. I needed something more. Something that would make him trigger the trap himself. And then, in an email I almost ignored, the opening I had been waiting for appeared. On Tuesday night, I found the email. It was an automated copy of the executive board's meeting schedule. A familiar name caught my eye. Orion Review, Strategic Committee, Thursday 9 a.m., board in attendance. Greg leading the session. One line below, my name. Invited technical support, the kind of invitation that sounds polite but comes with a leash. I let out a bitter smile. They were starting to realize the project couldn't stand on its own. And now I was being called, not as the creator, but as a side note. I told my wife. She listened in silence, the way she always does when she knows I'm caring more than I'm saying. "Are you going to let it slide?" she asked. I answered with a question of my own. "Do you remember when I built that part of the churn model? The reverse temporal correlation logic?" She frowned. She didn't remember. I never delivered it. It was still in testing, remember? It's what made everything actually work. Greg never saw it. She understood. She didn't say anything else. Just handed me a cup of tea and sat beside me. The message was clear. Then it's up to you now. The next morning I got to the office early. It was still dark. The building lights flicked on by themselves, like an autonomous city. I opened my laptop and finalized the documentation for that forgotten logic, the missing piece of the puzzle. I made sure it was dated, signed, and saved in 3 different places, including an email scheduled to send automatically if anything strange happened. The rest of the day passed in silence. I watched the hallways. People spoke about Orion with cautious excitement. The project was already seen as a high-stakes bet for the company. Some got involved for political gain. Others, out of fear of being left behind. Greg avoided me, but his team didn't. I received 2 more technical requests, each one tied directly to pieces only I understood. They were trying to build a car with half the engine still sketched out. Quietly, I began crafting my own meeting, mental, invisible, strategic. I played out every question the board might ask, every possible technical misstep Greg could make. I rehearsed answers that would sound improvised, but were sharp as a blade. That evening, before leaving, I stepped into the conference room where the big event would take place. It was empty. I sat at the head of the table, took a deep breath. I pictured the faces. The CEO, the head of product, the board members, and Greg, all of them, waiting to hear the future of the company, not knowing that the story they thought they knew was about to be rewritten. I placed my hand on the wooden surface of the table, thought about all the nights I stayed late building something just for someone else to take the credit. And I thought, maybe this is the last time that ever happens. As I stood up to leave, my phone buzzed. An internal notification. Greg added new slides to Thursday's presentation. I opened the file through the system. It was my work. Poorly formatted, incomplete, copied in a rush. He was desperate, but what he didn't know was that what he had copied didn't work. And in front of the board, all it would take was one simple question to make the whole thing collapse. But the real question was, would I be able to keep my composure when the moment finally came? By Wednesday, the mood in the office had shifted. The kind of shift only the observant notice. Conversations cut short, whispers in the hallways, glances exchanged between managers. Something was moving behind the scenes, and I knew exactly what it was. Greg was trying to build a fortress out of wet sand. Early that afternoon, I got an unexpected invite. Quick meeting with the CFO and head of product. I accepted. I knew it wasn't about snacks. It was damage control. We met in a small room, windows shut, AC blasting. They were polite but direct. They wanted to understand my actual technical involvement in Project Orion and whether I was comfortable with the project's current direction. They lied well. They pretended to be neutral, as if everything had emerged from collective decisions. They spoke in terms of business vision, cross-functional synergy, and shared credit. I listened in silence. And when the head of product brought up the churn algorithm like she actually understood it, I asked one simple question. Are you using cross-temporal or continuous regression? Silence. She hesitated. The CFO changed the subject. I went back to my desk and wrote an email. Formal, but clear. I stated that I would be present at the board meeting strictly for technical clarifications, and that any intellectual credit for the project should reflect the company's internal records and development history. I didn't send it. I scheduled it to go out 15 minutes after Greg's presentation ended. At the end of the day, I reviewed the files one last time. I adjusted a single line of code, just one, that if called without the correct parameters would cause an inconsistency in the predictive dashboard display. Nothing malicious, just faithful to the logic I had designed myself. If Greg tried to showcase that dashboard to the board without knowing how to properly trigger it, he'd be presenting a blank slide, or worse, a faulty graph. That was it. My work was done. The revenge wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be cruel. It would be technical, silent, impossible to ignore, and entirely ethical. I would simply let the facts speak for themselves. By 7 p.m., the office was nearly empty. I stayed at my desk, staring out at the city through the glass windows. I thought about my early days at the company. The veteran employees who showed me the system shortcuts, the meetings where I had to prove myself in silence, the weekends I worked while no one was watching. I had given this place everything I had, and now finally something was coming back to me. My dignity. As I shut off my monitor, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Steven, one of the younger analysts on Greg's team. It simply said, Greg's rehearsing alone in the boardroom. Looked nervous, really nervous. I replied with just one word. Understood. But inside I knew. The stage was set. And when the lights came on in that room, he'd be standing there, exposed. What he still hadn't realized was that in that meeting, I wouldn't be playing a supporting role. The morning of the meeting, the sky was heavy, the kind of thick cloud cover that felt like it was pressing down on the entire company building. I arrived early, earlier than I needed to. It was intentional. I wanted to see faces. I wanted to feel the air in the office before the presentation began. The hallways were quiet, except for printers humming and the clinking of coffee cups. I saw Greg stepping into the elevator with two of his analysts, clutching a leather folder and speaking too fast. He looked visibly tense, hair overly styled, face slightly sweaty, even with the cold air on full blast. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and then without warning it came. The catalyst, an internal message from finance. "Brian, do you have 5 minutes to talk about Orion?" The system flagged inconsistencies in the churn KPIs from the latest report. I didn't reply. I walked straight to them. In the small finance office, 3 people were waiting, 2 analysts and the senior manager. The atmosphere was thick. On the screen, misaligned graphs, curves that made no sense. The manager got straight to the point. Greg submitted this dashboard as the basis for next quarter's revenue forecast, but the data looks fabricated. Can you help us make sense of it? I looked at the numbers. Due to the absence of cross-temporal regression logic, I knew exactly what it was. The model was incomplete, and the error was glaring. "This isn't fabricated," I said calmly. "It's just technically hollow." They exchanged glances. The manager bit his lip. "Would you be willing to explain this to the board if necessary?" I nodded. "If necessary." I went back to my desk and opened the email I had scheduled. I added a single line at the top. Update. Technical inconsistency confirmed by finance at 8:17 a.m. Saved it. Closed the laptop. By 8:45, the boardroom was already partially filled. The rectangular table gleamed under cold lights. The CEO was adjusting papers in front of him. Several familiar board members, faces I'd seen in countless meetings, walked in one by one, speaking in hushed tones. The head of product greeted me with a reserved nod. The CFO offered a tight, nervous smile. Greg walked in last. He carried a laptop and a carefully constructed posture. He shook the CEO's hand a little too firmly. Long handshakes, confident looks, but when his eyes met mine, he hesitated. The CEO opened the meeting. "We're here to review the progress of Project Orion, a key initiative for the company's future." Greg began his presentation. He said all the right things, used all the right buzzwords, played his part in the well-rehearsed performance. But when he got to the data section, something cracked. "And now I present our initial projected results." He clicked. The dashboard appeared, but the graph was wrong. The curve dipped where it should have risen. The revenue forecast contradicted the engagement rate. The silence in the room was instant. The CEO frowned. "Greg, are these numbers validated?" Greg stammered. Searched his laptop for something he couldn't find. Called it a formatting glitch. The CFO cut in. "We've already confirmed with finance it's a technical inconsistency." Then the CEO turned to me. "Brian, can you help us understand what happened?" I stood up slowly, took the presentation remote, looked over at Greg, who was now gripping his pen like it was a latch he couldn't let go of. "Of course," I said. "But first, may I ask a question?" The CEO nodded. I turned to Greg. "Greg, would you like me to explain how the temporal regression engine behind the churn model works? Or would you prefer to explain it yourself?" He froze. Silence. For the first time, every eye in the room was on me, and in that moment, the facade began to crumble. Greg didn't answer. The room was silent, not the kind of silence that signals respect, but the kind that holds suspended discomfort, the kind of silence that comes right before someone falls, someone who climbed too fast. I took a deep breath, turned to the screen and continued as if this were just another routine meeting. The dashboard shown here lacks any real predictive logic. It relies on surface-level correlation, based on absolute time rather than cross-behavioral analysis. The real engine, the heart of the projection, depends on reverse temporal regression, a framework that was never implemented because, quite simply, no one else knew it existed, except me. I turned back to the CEO. "This modeling was developed in-house by me in early March. It's recorded in the company's backup system. I can walk you through the timeline, the prototypes, the emails. The documentation is complete, including notes identifying exactly where the project would fail without this component." I projected the original timeline, showed the early drafts, the annotations, the time-stamped correspondence between ideas and deliverables. Every detail, validated, time-stamped, undeniable. The board shuffled through their papers. Murmurs began to spread. Greg tried to speak up. We worked on this concept together. It was a collaborative effort. I didn't let it slide. Greg, you dismissed this idea in a meeting on March 6th, called it too ambitious. Then 2 weeks later it appeared on your slide deck, with a different name. The CEO pressed his lips together. Greg, can you confirm that? He didn't answer. The head of product closed her laptop. The CFO stood up. Brian, why didn't you bring this forward sooner? I looked around the room, because I wanted it to be clear who was speaking from truth, and who had just rehearsed to sound like they owned it. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't revenge in the usual sense. It was precision. It was proof that real work, the kind that matters, is done in silence, by people who understand more than they speak. Greg made one last attempt. I just wanted to drive the company forward. To deliver value, the CEO cut him off. What you delivered, Greg, was ego, not value. The meeting ended earlier than planned. The board requested a full technical report from me, and the executive leadership convened behind closed doors. As the CEO walked out, he paused just long enough to say, Brian, you're no longer just technical support on this. Get ready to lead it, the right way. Greg left in silence, leather folder tucked under his arm. His steps were shorter. For the first time since he arrived at the company, he didn't seem bigger than he really was. That afternoon I got a message from HR. It wasn't a request. It was official. Congratulations, Brian. Effective immediately, you are the new lead for Project Orion. Dedicated team. Direct report to the executive board. Greg's been reassigned to a support role in integration. No leadership responsibilities for now. I read the message twice. I didn't smile. I just took a deep breath, closed the email, and got back to work. The next morning I arrived early, as always, but the floor felt different. Maybe it was the quieter kind of respect. Maybe it was the way eyes followed me subtly as I walked by. Or maybe it was just the fact that for the first time, I wasn't invisible. The product team's meeting room was already open. I stepped inside, lights on, whiteboard clean, post-its neatly arranged. There was a small label on the door with a subtle change. Product strategy, lead, E, more. I sat at the head of the table, opened my notebook, waited. One by one the team filed in. Analysts, designers, engineers. Some visibly tense, unsure how to act. Others nodded at me with quiet respect. Last came Greg. No folder, no smile. He took a seat in the corner, eyes down. No one said a word. I started the meeting with the same calm voice I always used. Good morning. Starting today, our mission is to rebuild Orion, technically and ethically. We're going back to the foundation, reviewing the model, understanding where we went wrong, and most importantly, building something that supports the business with integrity. No one moved. I continued. This isn't a witch hunt. This isn't revenge. But there is accountability. And above all, there's work to be done. I presented the updated timeline, assigned roles, restructured the workflow. I was firm, but fair. Some eyes lit up. Others, the younger ones, looked quietly relieved. Greg remained silent. At the end of the meeting, I asked him to stay. We closed the door. For a moment, I thought about throwing it all in his face. Everything he'd tried to do. But I didn't. I simply said, the company put you where you are. I didn't need to. He nodded. His voice cracked when he tried to speak. I know what you wanted, Greg, but now we've got work to do. And if you want to stay here, you're going to help. He stood there, unsure if it was a punishment or an invitation. As I walked to the door, I turned back to him and said, the difference between a leader and a slide presenter is what's left when the screen goes dark. He didn't respond. That afternoon, I sat in my new office. It wasn't bigger, it wasn't fancier, but it was mine. The window overlooked the parking lot, the same one where, months ago, I had considered walking away. I opened my email, a new message from the CEO. Your conduct saved more than a project. It preserved principles. The board is fully aligned with your leadership. Move forward with complete autonomy. I closed the email, stared at the blank screen for a few moments. For the first time in a long while, I felt whole, not as someone who had won, but as someone who had stood tall when others tried to erase him. And the most curious part was this: even in silence, I was still here, and now everyone knew it. 6 weeks later, Project Orion was relaunched. This time it was functional, cohesive, ethical, every line of code reviewed, every insight validated, every metric carefully built, not to impress the board, but to solve real problems for real customers. The predictive dashboard now ran on the full logic, the same logic that had once been buried deep in a forgotten folder, waiting for the right moment to surface. In the quarterly report, the CEO mentioned my leadership by name, calling it a model of technical integrity applied to strategic innovation. The entire board applauded, not out of politeness, but out of conviction. Greg? He stayed on the team, quieter, more reserved. He now occupied a smaller office at the end of the hallway. The leather folder was gone. So were the hollow speeches. Every now and then, he sent me technical questions. I answered them, without resentment. After all, I didn't need to step on anyone to rise. I just needed to keep delivering what I always had: consistency. The team grew. We brought in new analysts, young, curious. One of them called me a living legend over lunch. I laughed, but deep down I knew the truth. I wasn't a legend. I was just someone who stayed, someone who, despite being ignored, despite being betrayed, kept going, until the truth made itself undeniable. On the last day of the quarter, the CEO called me in for an informal chat. "Brian, this company needs more leaders like you. We want you to help train the next generation." I accepted, not as a promotion, but as a mission, to teach others how to do what I did, without having to go through what I went through. On my way out, I passed the lobby and saw Stephen, the junior analyst who had warned me about Greg weeks earlier. He looked at me with that spark in his eyes, the kind you get when something important finally clicks. "Thanks for not giving up," he said. I answered simply, "I just did what needed to be done." Walking back to my office, I passed a few of the older workers, people who'd seen me back when everything was smaller, simpler. They nodded, and this time, it was different. It was respect. At my desk, I found an old note, a sketch of that first model I drew up on a Saturday night in my kitchen. I tucked it into the back of the drawer. Maybe one day someone will need to be reminded. Great ideas don't come from PowerPoints. They're born in silence. And you? Have you ever had to watch someone take credit for your work and pretend not to notice?